welcome to this session of Check Your Facts. My name is Liz Svoboda. I am the Instruction Outreach Librarian. I am going to ask that everybody mute themselves for this, and if you have any questions, please feel free to pop those into the chat as we're going along. My colleague Emily Newberry will be looking at those and kind of monitoring it a little bit, but we will have time at the very end to kind of have a Q&A section. All right. So this session of Check Your Facts is about politics and journalism. And today we're going to be focusing fairly broadly. There is just so much to cover that I'm not going to be able to really go in depth into any of these sites, right? And these are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the information that's available out there, okay? So we're going to do a really brief refresher on the SIFT method, which is kind of how you, or the kind of moves you need to do in order when you are presented with some information to kind of understand what's going on, how you kind of evaluate sources with the CRAP method, as well as I'll introduce some lateral reading. And then we're going to talk about levels of evidence, because fact checking is all about getting to the primary sources of information. And so talking about what that is versus some of the other commentary and news sources you might be seeing. And then I'll kind of go through some different places to look at fact checking, what oversight organizations actually are, what watchdogs are, and then we're going to talk about disappearing data, because that is definitely a big issue going on right now in the federal government. All right, so first off, SIFT. These are the things to do when you're looking at a source of information to kind of help decide if it's credible or not, and also to kind of give the source more context. So this was developed by Mike Caulfield in 2019. He's a really big researcher when it comes to misinformation and just kind of media literacy. So the first thing to do is like pause, right? And kind of understand and think about where you're finding this source. Are you is it coming to you through social media? Are you searching for this intentionally? Is it coming to you through like a library database? Is it being pushed with search engine optimization through Google? These kinds of things. The other moves kind of talk about actually how you look at a source. So looking into the source itself, what is it saying? Who is the author? All this kind of stuff. And then that kind of leads you to, and I don't necessarily like how he's got it listed here with find better coverage and trace claims, because I think you kind of need to trace claims first when you're looking at a source, right? And so it's like looking to see what their citations are. If there are live links in a page, are they taking it back out to other stories, or are they leading you to those primary sources? Are they ads that are linked within there? And then again, in combination of investigating that source, which we'll talk about a little bit more, and tracing those claims, is it necessary to find better coverage, right? Should you go to that primary source? Is the source that you've been kind of pushed in a TikTok algorithm or a Facebook algorithm so biased that it's like not necessary? You need to find better coverage, find more unbiased coverage, find, again, that primary source of data, okay? We've actually got a page about this on the library that I'll show you in a little bit here. But when you're investigating this source, a lot of the time people are familiar with the CRAP method, which is just a series of questions to kind of ask yourself, right? How current is it? How relevant is it? Again, to your topic, but also to the audience that you're talking to. Who wrote it? What are their qualifications? Can you fact check it, right? And what is the purpose? Is it entertaining? Is it persuading? Is it trying to sell you information? Is that bias addressed? Okay. Again, this is a really stripped down version of it to fit on a slide. And it's not necessarily a checklist, right? Like you can't go through and check everything off just to make sure that's credible, because a lot of the time credibility is contextual, okay? So for example, if I am doing a research project on alt-right groups, some of their and how they kind of present themselves to the media, those websites are going to be incredibly biased towards their perspective, right? But because I'm doing my research on that group, those are going to be my primary sources, right? Those are going to be the most accurate sources I have about like what they are talking about themselves. Now, am I going to rely completely on those sources? No. I'm always going to find additional outside sources that are kind of to support the research that I'm doing, to say, have other people been looking at this? What are they talking about there? Right. So you can't always rely just on one source of evidence. in one source of information. Okay. The other thing that you should be doing, especially when you're kind of investigating the source, is to get off the page, right? To look into the source itself. This is often called lateral reading. And instead of just looking at what a source says, looking at the context around the source. So again, how did you find it? Did it get pushed to you through a search engine optimization? Did it come through a social media algorithm? Were you intentionally looking for it, through a library, or again, through like Google or DuckDuckGo or something? What are others saying about it? Not necessarily just the report, but also the people who have published the report or who are pushing this information out there, right? Who and why was the group funded, right? If it's a academic journal, they have a really particular kind of point of view. If it's a government source or a watchdog, a lot of the times there's very particular biases that come with these groups, right? And you can also see, like, again, who are the funders? Who are their biases? And sometimes you might have to look into these a little bit more deeply. So let's take a look at two quote unquote watchdog organizations here. Okay, so one is going to be the Capital for Research Center, and the other is going to be the Project on Government Oversight. Okay, so Capital Research Center here is billing itself as America's investigative think tank. Okay, and we'll see, okay, that they've got stuff about Doge, and it's a project to document some of those degrees examples of, and then we'd have to go into the special report to see more about this, right? And it's the federal government's careless use of your tax dollars. Okay, so you already see that it's kind of like aligning itself with Doge a little bit here. And if we scroll down to the bottom, we'll see that there is going to be some information, and it's definitely a little bit more right leaning in this case. And at the very bottom here under the About Us, it talks about that it was established in 1984 to promote and better understand charity and philanthropy, right? So it's not necessarily looking at government so much. And if you'll notice that there's these words about individual liberty, a free market economy, and limited constitutional government. And what is that? Libertarian, right? So they have a very conservative point of view, leaning into that libertarian, and again, they were established before the Tea Party, so I'm not even going to touch on that, but they're definitely a libertarian kind of point of view. So we know what their bias is, and they're being very, very upfront about this, okay? But if we look at other sources, so if we go into a place like GuideStar, which is a database that we have through the University of Michigan Flint, and we can actually look up nonprofits here. So we do see that Capital Research Center is a 503, I think. But if I put in, give it a second to search here, we can actually see that it's technically a charity, right? Okay. And we can actually look to see who its principal officers are. We can talks about what their programs are. We can look at the financial information about them and their reports and things. So we can actually try to kind of follow the money a little bit through something like this. Okay. But also, even again, looking in and doing like a quick Google search or going into Wikipedia, for example. So I didn't have this open. Right. And it's a conservative nonprofit organization. It discourages, it does have some, and it talks about it's monitoring the major liberal donors of the United States. So, right, it has a really particular point of view when it's coming to a watchdog. And a lot of watchdogs have this, right? So kind of on the other spectrum, we have the Project on Government Oversight. And if you even start looking into like what their issues are, civil rights, corruption of abuse and power, national security, right? We can kind of see what's going on, and we can look at their work, including in their About section as well. So you do kind of want to see at least a little bit of what they're going on. We can look at their history and who their projects and partnerships are. And it can kind of look to see some of the information that's kind of coming out about them. Okay. If we do a similar look, and again, they kind of started out, the very beginning, top here, they started out in 1981. So again, and they've kind of grown over the years, and they were looking specifically at defense funding. So again, two organizations that have been founded about the same time or within a decade of each other. So they're very long coming, or they're they've been around for a very long time, but again, they have very different kind of points of view. And we can even start to look at that through what's kind of coming up here on their sites. And we can look to see what's going on. Again, we're talking about ICE, we're talking about, DOJ, so deaths in custody, right? So prison reform, this kind of thing. So you kind of have to take a bigger look at a bigger picture. And again, if we look at, again, a fairly unbiased source like Wikipedia here, again, it's a nonpartisan nonprofit. Nonpartisan just means it's not directly associated with like the Republicans or the Democrats. It's kind of outside, even though they might have more liberal or conservative fundings, okay, or kind of list or leanings, shall we say. So we can again get a little bit more information about them and get off the page of just looking at what they're saying, okay. So when it comes to lateral reading and actually, again, verifying this information, you need to kind of think about the level of evidence that you're finding. So typically levels of evidence are just divided into primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. And the source, when you're fact checking, that you want to find the most are going to be these primary sources of evidence, okay? These are the original documents of an event or discovery. They're often seen as the most objective and most credible sources. So these could be research articles, right? This could be an academic journal, a scientist has done a study and they're reporting the findings of that experiment, of that survey that they've done, right? When it comes to government and journalistic information, a lot of the time it's going to be reports that are coming directly from the government. It is going to be court records. It is going to be the reporting of, breaking news that's happening, right? And interviews with people, okay? Sometimes you're going to be able to track back to an even more primary source, if that makes sense, right? So if a news reporter is coming out and talking about a report that's just been released from Doge, we'll just pick on Doge for right now. We might have to go back and look at Doge's site to see where is this information coming from? What was the tweet that came out? Are they able to go back and find information that's coming later on? So you might have to even go back farther to see what's coming out of this. All right. And we'll talk, and finding primary sources of government information can be a little daunting. Okay. So on the libraries page here, and again, a lot of other libraries will have a similar page. We'll have a research guide to federal government resources. Okay. This is listed under our subject guides here. I will also pop this into the chat for you all, because this is where a lot of the sources that I'm going to be talking about, we have linked on this page. Okay. But basically how this is organized is that we have some of the bigger places to start. Some of them are directly from government sites, so data.gov, USA.gov, congress.gov, but we also have some that are particular to, or subscriptions that we have through the university. So CQ Researcher Plus Archive, for example, has a really great background history about what's been going on in policies through the government, okay? The one place, and then we also have it kind of divvied out by the different branches of government. So for example, Congress, and we can go into, say, congress.gov to find the current legislation, the actual public laws, bills that have been passed, where they are in that hierarchy, right? We also have things like C-SPAN or the US Senate radio, so we can actually like listen to and watch and listen to what's going on in the chambers of Congress and in committee hearings, right? A lot of you will see clips of this on the news. We can actually go and look at this ourselves, right? If you wanted to go in and find things like the US code, you could find that. You could look and find all this information out there. It is sometimes a little bit difficult though. So for example, if I'm going to go into congress.gov, right, it takes a little bit of expertise to kind of know how to find information, right? Because a lot of the time it's going to ask you for searching just about bills on healthcare, for example, is going to bring back a whole lot of stuff. And do I want information about a committee hearing? Do I want to come from the congressional record? Am I looking at bills? So again, it sometimes takes a little bit of expertise, or at least kind of the ability to learn to kind of look and to see what this is. But you can actually kind of tell, you know, and especially with bills, like where it has been introduced, if it's been a Senate or a House bill, right? And you can kind of track things as they're kind of going on here. And again, whether it's a resolution or a bill, which again, resolutions are typically not something that comes into law. It's just like a statement that the House or the Senate is going to make. Bills are going to be those precursors to what might become a law, right? So there is this little bit level of transparency that you can actually go through and look at this. You can even find congressional research reports, which I think are some of the greatest things to look at, because it's a branch of the sorry, it's a hold on, come on. It's going to take me a second to get down to these. But the Congressional Research Service is an arm of the Library of Congress, and this is basically reports that are created by researchers in the Library of Congress and other librarians, and they will basically get rid of the committee reports. These will actually talk about the research that's been done to kind of persuade or to inform, not persuade, but to inform members of Congress about the issues that they're going to be voting on, right? To give them background and things. Most of these are available through congress.gov. There's some that are available through the National Archives. There's also some that are available through the University in Texas down here. And we've got some of these, University of North Texas. We have some of these kind of pulled out here too. Okay. Now, again, congress.gov, and you'll see this a lot with government information, is that they are just very oblique. They're kind of hard to get through. So adding on some of these secondary sources, like news sources, like some news sources, like Watchdogs, like oversight committees, is going to help kind of understand this, because not everybody has the time and ability to build this expertise of what is going on. Okay. So this is where we're going to come in here and look at things like fact-checking organizations, right? There is an organization called the International Fact-Checking Institute that is basically kind of the, I'm not going to say professional development organization, but it's a kind of a professional org that really kind of verifies and trains fact checkers in a way. And it's from the Poitner Institute, which is from the University of Tampa, I believe, and it's a journalism school, right? So a couple of the really good places to look are going to be, excuse me, this should be factcheck.org. There's an E in there, PolitiFact and Snopes. And many news organizations will have fact-checking arms, but they're not always as searchable as the ones that we're going to see here. Okay. So again, most of these are going to be listed on the federal government sites here under fact-checking, oversights, and watchdogs. Okay. And again, they might come into places like the executive branch. So for example, we'll get into this in a little bit, but let's look at a couple of these. So factcheck.org is a project of the Annenberg Public Policy. You can actually, fact check posts. You can kind of look through things. You can even ask a question, and they'll do for both political facts as well as science facts. So you can kind of put this in here now, or you can actually ask them. You can look through specific, topics, and they even have some types of like kind of initiatives that they're looking for. Okay. So if we're going to look at this, we can see when it's posted, you'll have information about what's looking for it. And the other thing that you need to look at are the links that are hyperlinked in here, right? So the 2017 law lowered, where is this going to? Is it going to another factcheck.org article, which again might give you more information about what's going on, right? And again, in this one, maybe we want to go down that rabbit hole and find that IRS file, right? If there are links, if you are able to kind of follow those links back to the original documents, now it's going to be good. Now, am I able to read this IRS document? No, I am not a tax auditor. Okay. So again, this is why some of these organizations exist, to kind of be that mediator, to be that translator between what's going on, right? Because I don't have the time or the patience to become a CPA. I really just don't. So I might have to rely on some other outside sources for help with this, okay? But again, if they are pulling you back and giving you really specific information about where they're coming from, that's always good, okay? PolitiFact is going to be really similar. PolitiFact actually has these little, what they call truthometers, and they actually go a little bit more broad and look at a lot of social media posts. They put out a lot of things that are coming through the news as well. And it's not just focused at the national level. Annenberg is definitely a little bit more focused at the national level. PolitiFact does everything, or they try to again. So we could find something about this one from Carolyn Levitt, for example, who's the White House press secretary right now. And again, it's really recent, from the 11th. So we can look to see, and it's taking that this was a false statement. And again, it's going to pull in through here, and you'll be able to see and go back to these links about where this is happening. And it might link out to, full on either sites or clips that are kind of coming through. And again, they may come through a variety of news sources. Okay. So I like PolitiFact. It's because it has this kind of easy to read, kind of score here. But again, always understanding like whether it's false, whether it's true, mostly true, half true, mostly false. So they will kind of give you that really broken down, and they'll also explain why they've made this kind of judgment. Okay. And you can actually like follow particular fact checkers too, right? They employ a lot, and they're actually they're associated directly with the Poynter Institute. Okay. The last kind of independent nonprofit agency, actually, I don't know if Snopes is actually a 503c. I'd have to check. But Snopes has been around for a very long time. It actually started out in 94, I believe, or early 90s, and it was focused on like urban legends and hoaxes and that kind of stuff. But it quickly evolved into being a larger fact-checking organization. Okay. So again, it will have similar things where you can actually search for them. You can talk about, it doesn't have the same kind of truthometer, but it will actually kind of focus on different options here. So you can like submit a rumor, you can search for it. So if I'm going to look for, we'll just pick on Doge for right now. It'll talk about what it is and basically where this information is coming from, and try to trace it back, these rumors back as far as they can as well. Okay. And it will, again, kind of talk about, we could not confirm or disprove any of the information, which is the origin of the claim. They really try to give you as much information and kind of going back, and again, linking out to the original stories from Wired and the New York Times, and according to the Office of Personnel Management, right? They're trying to link you back to these primary sources. Okay. Now, when it comes to journalistic fact checking, they are not as searchable as far as I can tell, versus something like Snopes, where you could just search something, or PolitiFact or factcheck.org. AP Fact Check is, again, you'll kind of see more recent things that are coming up, and you'll notice that there's a lot of overlap between them. So looking at a couple of different fact checkers is sometimes a good idea, especially if there's a lot of miscommunication, you're really unsure about that. But there's no really good way to search for this, right? It's just the more recent things are kind of coming up in this feed, right? Same thing with the Washington Post fact checker. And the Washington Post fact checker is actually one guy. He's been doing this for like 20 years. And so he puts out something like a couple times a week. So again, it's not as robust as the AP, which is the Associated Press, which is a large network of independent journalists, right? But again, when we're looking at these things, and actually this is something again that came out today, and hold on. And of course it is behind a Washington Post, paywall. So again, AP is not behind a paywall, right? It's a free organization site here, that you can kind of look back. Now, when it comes to journalistic fact checkers and in general, there is, some bias that comes with these. A lot of them tend to be what some people would call left-leaning. But in this day and age, being centrist is always not like there's no real center in my opinion, okay? But there are charts out there that will kind of guide you a little bit. That talk about like the all sides media bias chart, for example, is one that does this. And it even has one for fact checking, but you'll notice that a lot of the fact checkers kind of are in the center and lean a little bit to the left. And typically when they say lean a little bit to the left, it means that they all agree that climate change is actually a thing. Who knew? So just kind of keeping in mind that if you see these kinds of charts, they are not necessarily like there's a lot of controversy that kind of comes around with them, and even just the use of these, because they kind of give a false sense of security sometimes. So again, just kind of watching out for some of the dog whistles and other kind of language that you see, especially the types of shall we say topics that fact checkers kind of look at could be useful. Okay. Now, so fact checking typically comes from these independent organizations. They're usually kind of news based in a lot of ways. They really focus on news and social media and that kind of thing. Oversight organizations are another beast entirely. So this is what DOGE would like to be. But we already had an oversight organizations through the government. So the Government Accountability Office is where those inspectors general actually worked and like did actual audits of things and went through and made sure that people were spending money correctly and everything. Were they perfect? No, but they actually saved a lot of money and actually, went through a longer term and more detailed process in order to uncover government waste and spending. Okay. You actually can see we have a searchable database of all of their reports at oversight.gov. And you can even see, spending sources through usaspending.com. And there's other places that you can find information about government spending, particularly through sam.gov, which is the official system for government contracts, wages, and federal assistance. And not that like a personal level, this is organizations and like how this money is distributed, how you can kind of get this and what the government is trying to buy, basically. Okay, so again, this information has been out there. How difficult it is to kind of look at and see, that's a whole other kind of issue. Okay. So we're going to pull in, just to give you guys an idea, the Government Accountability Office. Okay. So again, you can look at recent reports, recommendations in the database, restricted reports, recent things that are kind of being pushed out. They are still working, right? So reporting on industrial base needs risk improvement for the National Nuclear Security Administration. They are pulling together these kinds of reports that you can actually see and view and download, right? So for example, the improvements needed to control over retention of key security and cash activity, right? It'll pull you some fast facts. It'll pull out some highlights about what's going on. You can see some executive actions that are taken, and you can also download the full report. Okay. So again, there is actually a lot of transparency built into the government itself if you know where to look, if you know that it's out there, because our government is gigantic. So again, there's a lot of things to kind of look for. Now, to the GAO site is not the most, there's not like you can search through it and all these kind of things. You can view topics about different things, but it's not really searchable in the way that a database is. Oversight.org is that database, right? So you can search within the reports, you can search for recommendations that are kind of coming through. So for example, if we were going to do search reports on Veterans Affairs, for example, you can see filters, you can see different types of things that are kind of coming through. And you'll notice that, there's some fairly recent reports from the Office of the Inspector General about the Veterans Affairs Consolidated Mail Outpatient Pharmacy Medications, right? So how this is kind of working through things, and you can actually go and view the reports and kind of pull up things that are going through here, okay? There's a lot of information under here, and you can kind of, again, look by federal, state, and local reports. You can also like go into full investigative reports, as well as the press releases that are kind of being put out about these reports as well. Okay. The last kind of government oversight board that I'll put out there is USA Spending. And this is where you can actually kind of find information that is being put out there. You can actually kind of explore the data that's being awarded, right? And view that by state or by organization. You can look for different profiles and who's winning grants and these kinds of things. So again, there's a lot of information that's out here, but getting down into it is sometimes a little bit difficult. But just to give you an idea, so if I was going to look for awards on a particular key period, you can look within a time range. You can look things that are coming from an awarding agency, so a particular department or a program within the government or institute, for example. If you have an actual award ID, you can look at that. There's a lot of different options that are coming in here too. So again, it's sometimes a little bit overwhelming when you're trying to look through all of this, which is why fact checkers and watchdogs exist, right? Because sometimes it can be a little, the expertise that you need in order to really look for this, not always the easiest. But if I wanted to look for something like school lunch and do a submit, we can see information from a bunch of different awardees who are getting this information. We can actually even see the amount of money that we are giving to them, right? So for example, Mathematica here, we had an obligation to pay them their original contract that we signed with them versus how much we've actually paid them. And we can even look to see within this report how much we've paid them over time, right? So this isn't always coming out in 1 year or one fiscal year. Sometimes you will say that it's kind of coming over multiple years, multiple days. You can see where it's kind of coming from here and actually pull through and look at this. And you can even see like if there are recipients under this and the individual transactions sometimes even. So again, here's all the different organizations that are all the different awards that have become to this particular entity here. Okay. When you're looking at this, a lot of the times it's a good idea to kind of look at the grants that are coming back through this, and you can kind of tell who's looking at this, and again, where that money is coming from. So a lot of it is coming from the Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Ag, not necessarily from the Department of Ed. Okay. All right, so watchdogs, as I mentioned earlier, are sometimes they have this expertise to kind of look at. We already looked at 2 examples of kind of who's there. But organizations, they're outside the government who watch the actions and spendings of government agencies and sometimes other organizations, right? And sometimes they could even be kind of tracking bills or trying to track money that's sent in a way that is a little bit less obtuse than some of the government databases, right? So we're going to start with GovTrack. This is a way to kind of look for legislation. We saw congress.gov, right? You can look for bills and you can look for other things. Sometimes you want to see information about your particular constituent. So we're in Flint right now. So we'll put in the university site, and so we can see who our senators are and who our representative is. So we can see and get alerts about the information that our senators and our representative are. We have information about who, you know, how to kind of get them. That is, again, a free site here. And you can actually kind of see where on their kind of ideological standpoint they are. Most of our reps are kind of in this kind of centrist mode here. You can see where his committee membership is, if he's enacted any legislation, the bills he's currently sponsoring, right? And like kind of his recently introduced things. You can look to see what his voting record is. All of this information is getting pulled from congress.gov though, okay? It's just a little bit more readable. And I really like this for kind of watching members of Congress, because you can kind of follow them to see where they're looking, what they're looking for, okay? The other thing that govtrack.gov is it actually links out to Open Secrets. So Open Secrets you can get to on its own, and I'll show you what it looks like. But basically, this is kind of trying to follow the money, right? So understanding where politicians, their contributions are coming from, where lobbying efforts are kind of coming from. That's what Open Secrets is supposed to be looking at here. And if we're looking at, say, Senator Peters' Open Secrets page here, you can see who he's kind of serving for, how much money he's raised, how much cash he has on hand, who his contributors are, who the top industries he's looking at are from, you know, how much average money he's raised, who his contributions are from, and all of this is coming from the SEC. So if we look at and click on the methodology of this section, you'll see that it'll talk about how they are actually looking at information about and finding information from the SEC and other, and how they're kind of looking at this information. Okay. So again, Open Secrets has, you know, some expenditures, and they'll say demographics and other things like that, but you can actually find some you'll see some of the kind of top searches that are coming through, recent searches that looking at. So if we wanted to see information about Aldi, you'll see that they are, who are they giving money to, and kind of where they're getting from this information from here too. So again, it's trying to kind of pull back the curtain on a lot of government spending, and like money, not only government spending, but how that money is kind of being funneled to candidates and in support of different causes. Okay. And on their about page, it talks about, you know, how they are how it's kind of pulling this money or pulling this information from in here. Okay. Now, let's take a look, and we talked a little bit about capital research and project on the project on government oversight here. But if you actually look to see kind of what this information is, and we'll just talk about look at their issues on checks and balances, it'll kind of talk about like what their priorities are when it comes to this. And again, watchdogs often have a very particular kind of bias or mission in what they're looking at. So they're looking at government overreach. They're talking about our faith in the Supreme Court, building a better Congress, right? If you look at their work, you can actually look at the investigations, reports, and analyses, this kind of thing that are kind of coming up here. A lot of the time it will talk about, and you should be able to search most of the time when it comes to this, but you should be able to, again, follow back into some of the initial and kind of primary source documents, right? Or kind of going back and like following these links out to the Washington Post article that they're linking to, how they're finding it, what the court filing is, and kind of pulling this out through PACER, right? Which is where the PACER is the government site for the federal government kind of court document site, right? And so again, there should be a lot of links in these links and kind of additional evidence within these watchdog reports. And that's usually a good sign that they've really done their due diligence, right? Because with an academic article, you have a list of references. You have that really formal bibliographic structure. When you're looking outside this kind of academic sphere, it's a little bit looser in like what a citation looks like. But a lot of the times these links will kind of pull back and look at them. Okay. All right. The last thing I'm going to talk about is disappearing data. So government data and websites change all the time. This is nothing new, right? particularly at the start of a new administration, especially the Trump administration, there's a lot of information that kind of gets pulled on and off. Like the whitehouse.gov, like that changes pretty much the second that the new president gets sworn in, right? But there are kind of ways to go back and pull information that's being that is changing out there. Okay. So one way to do this is using the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine. Okay. So this is I did a search just a minute ago because I was looking at like inspector, there's a report on the government site that talks about how many inspector general's seats are absent, right? And when I looked at it initially, so when I go to the page here, pull this up for you just so you can see what it currently looks like, okay? We get a page not found error, right? So like, okay, this page doesn't exist anymore, but it's from the government oversight page. So why doesn't this exist anymore? Okay. Or maybe not why, but like, can I get the information that was there? The Wayback Machine, what this does is it tries to kind of grab a snapshot of the different pages at a given time. Okay. And you'll notice if you hover over here, there's snapshots that are the larger the kind of bubble is, the more snapshots that they were trying to get. So I'm like, okay, it's now March 14th. Back in early February, what was the snapshot like then? And it'll take a second to load here. And we've got a page not found. I'm like, okay. So I'm going to go back. And I'm going to go back into 2024 and say, what was it like in December? Okay. And you can use this kind of, the blue and green typically means that there was information on the page. Nope, hold on. If I go all the way back into like, we'll just pick August here. I think August is the time that I actually saw it. The one thing I don't like about the Wayback Machine is that it takes a little bit of time to get there. But come on.
I have a question for you, Liz, while this loads.
Yep.
And this is something I've been meaning to look into. Do you know, sometimes there'll be a link to a PDF. Does the
Mm-hmm.
Wayback Machine, will it load old PDFs that have been taken down, or is it only going to show you this crawling of the actual sites themselves?
As far as I know, it will. I don't know if the last time I've checked it on a PDF that got popped up because so it might, but the Wayback Machine, it's not very systematic in what it crawls, how often it crawls. There's an algorithm that's going on behind it. It doesn't crawl over everything every single day, right? So that's why sometimes there's one snapshot, sometimes there's two, sometimes there's none for a particular day, and it doesn't cover every site. So I don't actually know if it would pull back PDFs or not. And the other thing that it doesn't do is that there often isn't a live link to things here. Sometimes it will pull back a live link, which it looks like it's going to do now because we're in still the Wayback Archive here. Fingers crossed. But sometimes the links within a page won't necessarily link back to what's going on. So it's not like a live page that's really updated. It's kind of a snapshot of what that page is doing. But here is some information about the org, and you can tell that when this is kind of coming from here, you can see that how many captures there are within a given time period. Okay. So the Wayback Machine is going to be really useful if you are doing if you started a project before the Trump administration took over and you found sources that were kind of being taken down, especially from Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health, Department of Ed, the EPA. A lot of those pages have changed. So using this to go back to a time is going to be a good idea. And this is also why I'm really starting to suggest students include access dates in their bibliography so that we know when they looked at this. Okay, so you can kind of go back and try to go back to these pages as much as you can. I mentioned that the end of term is usually a really big time when uh departments or when information kind of changes over. So there's actually this end of term web archive that's been going around for a very long time. And it tries to capture information from specifically whitehouse.gov about the kind of changeover. So you'll see that this was Bush's term here, or Webhouse, or from 2008. We've got 2013, 2017, and then 2021, right? So you're able to actually go through and kind of find information about these particular archives, and it is part of the Wayback Machine, but it does a little bit more information about actually pulling all the files off of particular sites, and so that you can kind of, again, preserve this and pull the data yourself. Okay. The last one that I'm going to touch on specifically is Data Lumos. So this is actually a project through the ICPSR, which is institute at the University of Michigan, actually. And it is basically kind of acting as a backup for a lot of the data that is kind of listed on government sites, because government is, again, huge and kind of it focuses huge and it can focus on everything. Lumos is really focused on kind of social data and that kind of thing. But you can actually search in this archive as well, and find data this way. I'm also going to pull out that there's a bunch of different library sites out there. I actually like Syracuse's quite a bit, that will pull back. There's a lot of different data rescue and preservation initiatives that are ongoing as well. So you can kind of look through this and see where information is kind of coming from. And you'll notice that it does pull back end of term, the Wayback Machine, Data Lumos, as well as a bunch of other places too. Okay. So where to find help? The federal government resource page at the library, we have a lot of great information that's kind of stacked there. The research process guide on the library site as well has information about evaluating sources and identifying information sources. Even that page talks about like what a primary source is versus tertiary and everything like that. The library's YouTube channel has a lot of great webinars and other things that we've listed. Always feel free to ask a librarian on our page, and then you can again contact me directly. So in the last 10 minutes or so of our time, does anybody have any questions? I know this is a lot to go through, and again, just the tip of the iceberg, but if there's anything that you want me to kind of go over again or talk about, let me know.
I want to jump in real quick to say, while you were talking, I did kind of look into to my question, and it looks like, do you mind if I share my screen really?
Yeah, go ahead.
See if I can.
Let me stop my share.
Okay. Because it looks like what we can do is, so for example, hopefully you can see this. I was looking up PDFs on school lunches because that was the topic you brought up. So like here's a PDF that came up. So, when you click on it, often you get this Chrome extension piece here. If you try to look that in the Wayback Machine, it won't bring it up, but this extension right here, if you grab that, I popped that into the Wayback Machine, and it did have two captures. So
Nice.
not to say that every PDF, but that was something I had meant to look at. So because like what Liz is saying, sometimes you end up kind of hunting backwards, and if it's linking to a PDF, I've always been concerned that primary source information may not be there in the Wayback Machine, but it looks like it is. So you just have to be aware that if you are kind of coming up into this like Chrome Reader extension thing, that there is that URL that you can grab and hopefully potentially find an old capture of that. So I just wanted to share that because I think that could be helpful for people who are trying to go, find that old information, the original primary information that may have been taken down.
No, thanks, Emily. I didn't even think about PDFs. Thank you for watching this recorded webinar. Find upcoming webinars to register for at libcal.umflint.edu.